يلوموني العذال في مطلب العلا، ويلومني من لا هواي هواه، وحن كعبة المظيوم إلى ما وزابنا نجيره ولا نرضى بغير رضاه، ولنا هضبة يا من بها من نجيره، على رغم من ضده ومن عاداه، وكم قدهتنا من خطوب ملمه، ولا لينت منا صليب قناه، صبرنا على صكات بقع افعاننا، إله على من فوق عرش سماه، شابت عوارضنا وجهلت قلوبنا، ولا شيب إلا من يشيب نباه، على نصر مظلوم وعلى قمع ظالم، ومقام حق في رضا الإله. وربعي إلى ما جاء من الدهر نايبه، إلى قلت قول ما يرون سواه. المؤسس جاسم بن محمد بن ثاني، الله يرحمه ويسكنه الجنة.
صحيح أننا دولة غنية بإراداتها وطموحات شعبها وقدراته، ولكننا أيضا دولة ذات رؤية، ولهذه الحقيقة جذور في تاريخنا ومجتمعنا. لقد كانت قطر دائما عربية الانتماء، كما كانت دائما كعبة المظيوم، وقد حافظ المجتمع القطري على هذه القيم والتقاليد بعد أن أسبغ الله عز وجل علينا بمزيد من النعم، وبعد أن أصبحت قطر في المراتب الأولى عالميا في معدلات النمو، فلم ينسى مجتمعنا أصوله وتراثه والقيم التي جسدها عبر تاريخه الطويل. أول ما صار الكلام عن الغاز في قطر كان في الخمسينات، لكن في 1970 صار مؤكد احتياطي غاز موجود في قطر. طبعا كانت المشكلة اللي تواجهنا أن أسعار النفط متدنية، وسعر الغاز عندنا يمشي مع سعر النفط، إذا ارتفع النفط ارتفع الغاز، وتكلفة إنتاج الغاز كانت ضخمة.
I'm Andy Flower. I now work as an independent consultant focusing on LNG. I worked for BP for 32 years, from 1969 to 2001. It wasn't so much whether there was a demand for gas, it was a question of could you move the gas to the places where it was needed for consumption. Natural gas is not as easy to transport as oil is. There's not as much energy in each cubic metre of gas or LNG.
Getting LNG exports up and running was quite a challenge because they had to find long-term take-or-pay customers before the whole infrastructure had been built at this end, and that required people both to look at whether there was going to be a secure supply of gas over that period, both technically and in terms of whether it was going to be politically stable over that period of time as well. The other big game-changing thing which the Qataris did was by having open competitive tender for the development of the LNG facilities in the country. They were able to drive the price down to make the whole process of producing gas very much more attractive to customers. It
was 1989 when Chubu Electric indicated to Qatar Gas that they were interested in purchasing 4 million tonnes per annum. And I think that really was the time when LNG became more than just a possibility, a real probability.
لكن أشكر الشركات اليابانية، هي اللي مولت المشروع، هي اللي اشترت المشروع، الماركتينج هم اللي عملوه. لكن بعد فترة المشروع بعد فترة وجيزة من 2 طلع إلى 4 ملايين طن، وفيما بعد الآن حوالي 6 ملايين 7 ملايين طن في المشروع.
Getting the major oil companies involved was also extremely important for the development of the gas industry here.
In the early 1980s, the Qataris invited companies to a bid to participate in the development of an LNG project, and BP was one of the companies that was chosen.
For Shell, it was clearly an honor to have been selected by Qatar to be a partner in the LNG developments, based on His Highness the Emir's vision.
Gas became the revolution in terms of access, in terms of being cleaner than oil, in terms of being used reserves.
One of the major obstacles, as I said, it was the market. These projects, even in those days, we were talking about investing something in the order of $2.5 to $3 billion.
A very large number of people right at the top in BP and down through the ranks did not believe that there was a future for liquefied natural gas being sent around the world, and had some question marks about the actual viability of the Qatar Gas project itself.
BP's decision to pull out was made in November 1991.
فكان عندنا مشكلة أنها انسحبت، وهذه كانت لطمة لنا، وتصريحهم اللي طلعوه رأينا من وجهة نظرنا سيء بحق قطر.
I think there's a real lack of vision in BP as to what LNG could be and what role Qatar could play in that.
BP now, when I talk to people there, think it's probably the worst strategic decision they made.
Certainly from my own perspective, I regret not being involved, having seen what's happened. But I think some of the senior management probably, with hindsight, although they probably wouldn't admit it, they probably regret the decision.
أنا قرأت التقرير هذا تقريبا الساعة 1:15 في الليل، واتصلت مباشرة برئيس الوزراء الحالي اللي كان وزير بلدية، أعتقد في 89 في الثمانينات كذا كان وزير بلدية، وطلبت منه الذهاب إلى أمريكا لأن احنا محتاجين شركة استراتيجية تكون معانا تساعدنا في التمويل في التسويق.
Well, it was very fortunate for Qatar when BP pulled out that Mobil stepped straight into the breach, and so there was not very much of a hiatus before they were able to carry on with the development of the project.
Well, there are two essentials that are necessary for a company like ExxonMobil to consider entering business in a new country, and Qatar really provided both of those. First was a world-class resource, certainly in the form of the North Field. But equally, if not more important, was the leadership of the country and the vision of His Highness the Emir to create the proper business environment.
وأشكر أنا للأمانة أشكر شركة موبل اللي أتت إلى قطر وقدمت $300 مليون قرض إلى قطر، وليس للحكومة، على المشروع، في وقت كانت فيه أسعار النفط حوالي 6 أو 7 دولار.
LNG has been growing remarkably quickly. A lot of that actually is the Qatari expansion. I mean, clearly it's had to have vision and leadership, and that's certainly come right from the top, from the Emir. To have got from a stage of loading their first cargo of LNG at the end of 1996 to a position where they became the world's largest producer in 2006, and today they're producing 3 times as much as anybody else is truly amazing, and couldn't have been done without vision and leadership.
Shell has now invested more in Qatar than in any other country in the Shell Group where we operate. And I think this is a good kind of proof that the long-term visionary leadership of Qatar is actually paying out.
But with good planning, participation of all of the companies and the leadership of the Emir and the oil minister, well, this has really been handled in a very remarkable way. And the rest of the world really has stood by and watched. They need the energy, of course, but have watched the development of the LNG within Qatar in amazement, and the country really needs to be congratulated on a significant achievement.
I think one of the visions which allowed Qatar to become such a big producer was the decision to move the site of the plant from Said to the south of Doha, which was the original plant site, up to Ras Laffan, which at the time was an undeveloped piece of land.
احنا في 89 كان عندنا يعني خيارين. في أحد يتبنى خيار مدينة مسعيد. أنا كنت أتبنى مدينة راس لفان لأن الغاز أقرب إلى راس لفان. في نفس الوقت احنا كان هدفنا 30 مليون طن، وإذا نظرنا إلى 30 مليون طن وما بصاحبة من صناعات في تسييل الغاز أو صناعات مكملة مسعيد كانت صعبة أنها تتحمل هذا. فأنا اتخذت قرار 1989 أن نتجه إلى راس لفان.
The Emir inaugurated the site, which is now, as you can see, not anymore a stone, but one of the biggest LNG complex in the world. In fact, the biggest.
And that would give them the basis to expand from that single Qatar project, which was the original plan, 6 million tons, up to 2 LNG plants now, which jointly produce about 77 million tons a year.
هو أي مشتر للغاز يأتي وينظر إلى مدينة راس لفان وميناء راس لفان يعرف أن احنا جاهزين لتلبية طلباتهم من الغاز. نجد نفسنا أن من أهم الدول اللي تصدر الغاز للعالم، ووجدنا نفسنا أن احنا دولة ليس فقط تصدر الغاز للمسافات قريبة منها، بل إلى 23 دولة من أمريكا إلى اليابان إلى تايوان، الصين، كوريا الجنوبية، أوروبا، إسبانيا، إيطاليا. في قطر احنا عندنا مصداقية في التعامل، احنا ما في يوم أخلنا بعقد، بالعكس احنا كذلك مرنين. اولا يعني الحسن الحظ ان احنا نجحنا في تصدير الغاز. طبعا تصدير الغاز جاب لنا مداخيل اضافية. المداخيل الاضافية اللي جات لقطر وظفناها في مجال البنية التحتية من طرق، موانئ، مطارات، في التعليم، وهذا قطاع بالنسبة لنا مهم لأن مستقبلنا يتوقف على التعليم الجيد اللي يعطي فرص للقطريين ويرفع من المواهب القطرية.
It's a country developing itself and using its muscles, its money, not only for energy, but for being an example of what was considered in the old days a small emerging country as one of the major actors, even if the country remains small in terms of superficie, in terms of square meters, but it's big in terms of what it brings to the planet.
They're very good at managing the relationship with the buyers, and I think that's really one example of that. Is the way they responded to the earthquake and tsunami in Japan on March 11th last year. Japan was left with a lot of its nuclear power unusable. Qatar responded by moving extra cargoes into Japan, and they've supplied nearly half of the extra LNG that Japan needed. That's been important. Japan launched them, and they've remembered that.
2012 was a special year for Japan and Qatar because it was the 40th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. One of the most important things that Qatar offer or Qatar provide us are trust and friendship. And this was demonstrated after the earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan in 2011.
こんにちは。私、女川町長を務めております須田義明です。東日本大震災におきまして、日本全国では18,719名の方が犠牲になり、3分の2以上にあたる建物が津波によって全て流され、各自治体、市、町が被災している中で、被災した割合、率で言いますと最大となったのが我が町の被害状況でございます。私はその朝一番で町の姿を見ましたのは、私のもともと事務所兼倉庫があったところに立ったんですね。そこももちろん何にもありません。とりわけその中において冷蔵設備、これをどのように普及させていくかというのが大きな課題だったんですね。で、魚を取る加工屋さんが買う、それにしてもストックをしておく場所が必要なわけでありますが、その機能が8割以上我が町では津波によって失われてしまいました。
私はマスカーがある女川町魚市場海遊県人の理事長の高橋貴信です。お魚をですね、取ってくれる漁師さんのお魚を処理するのにまず冷蔵庫が必要だと、いわゆる希望の赤潮がですね欲しかったんですね、建物がですね。
最初カタール国から支援があると、カタールフレンド基金というのがあって水産業を支援したいというご意向を持っていらっしゃるというお話を伺った時には、本当に大変まずありがたい話だなというふうに感じさせていただきました。でまた同時にまずなぜカタール国としてそこまでして日本に対してしていただけるのかというような、疑問っていうんでしょうかね、ふわっとしたなんでだろうという気持ちはあったわけですが、それをお話を伺うにつけ、この40周年という迎える今日だからこそなんだと思いますが、一番最初にそのカタールの資源のですね、それをサポートしまた開発していただいたのが、日本の電力会社であったというようなお話を伺いまして、日本に井戸を掘ったですね、人のことを忘れるなという言葉がありますが、まさにそういうお話を伺わせていただきまして、今回本当に巨額の資金援助をいただく中で、マスカー、私たちの
一番の立つはですね、この建物そのものが心の支えなんです。このビッグがね、ちっちゃいにはダメなんですよ。
この場所から来た人が「あれは何?」って聞かれるのが最初なんですね。でカタールからの援助で冷蔵施設を今あそこに建ててるんですって言うんですけども、辺りにそれが立たないとやっぱりこんなふうに仕事もね、サンマも魚も入ってこないだろうし、船も入ってこないし、それは本当に大変嬉しいことだなって感謝してます。
この女川町がマスカーカタールの国のおかげですごく助かるだろうなというふうには感じてましたね。ありがたく思ってます。はい。
今回カタールのですね、政府の皆さんですとかその他の皆さんと交わらせていただきました。もちろん宗教種族も違えば生活スタイルも全く違うという中ではあるんですけれども、非常に心の温かい、また何て言うんでしょうか、本当に我々と変わらないよねというようなですね、非常に親近感を持たせていただいております。はい。
The one thing that was unique was the setting up of Al Jazeera satellite television channel. It totally transformed the whole approach to news broadcasting, not just in this region, but across the Middle East, and indeed probably across the Third World as well.
This is the vision of the Emir Sheikh Hamad. He saw this opportunity when the BBC Arabic failed in 1996, and he rushed in to hire all those journalists and to make this happen. Earlier, in one of his first acts after becoming the Emir, he abandoned or abolished the Ministry of Information and all the censors that were associated with it. The Emir created this channel and allowed the journalists to decide what was going to be on. He thought transparency would be good and it would be able to create the kind of liberal monarchy that he hoped to have here. I would say that it's serious journalism. It's providing this view of the Arab world that was not possible until this satellite channel came along. Before that, there were just terrestrial signals. That's the news that people got, was the news that their governments wanted them to hear.
One of the effects of Al Jazeera Arabic has been to set Qatar at odds with pretty well every one of its neighbours from time to time. But the Emir's view on this is rather like the British government's view would be to the BBC. We may pay for it, but we do not exercise continual editorial control over it.
The international spotlight was turned on Al Jazeera in 2001 after the 9/11 bombings. Because of its international reach at that time, it became a place to which Al-Qaeda delivered pre-recorded taped messages to the world, and Al Jazeera used them, as it should have. That's good journalism. They got something no one else had, people wanted to hear, so they played those things.
There's been a certain inconsistency in the criticism of Al Jazeera, because sometimes it just has relayed messages which the world probably ought to be hearing, and it doesn't necessarily mean they completely agree with the message which is being delivered.
وننتقل بكم مشاهدينا إلى بغداد حيث انطلقت صفارات الإنذار الآن ويبدو أن
during this period of time, you had Al Jazeera bureaus in Baghdad and in Afghanistan bombed by the United States military. And there was even a story that President Bush at the time wanted to bomb headquarters here in Doha, but was talked out of that by Tony Blair, the Prime Minister in the UK. So it became an international sensation after 9/11. They have just made it possible for news to be reported everywhere. They have journalists from dozens of countries in the newsroom here in Doha and hundreds and hundreds of experienced journalists around the world. I think they should be proud of their coverage of the Arab Spring. They sent journalists into these places. They put their lives at risk in some cases. What was going on in Tunisia became visible to people in Egypt who were equally frustrated with their situation. And when they saw that the Tunisians had unseated Ben Ali, they took to the streets after Mubarak, and it kind of then tumbled through the Arab world. Al Jazeera was the place you had to be. It has really the voice of the voiceless. It's on the streets, listening to ordinary people tell their stories.
What makes the Emir's foreign policy unique is that he does not come from a particular ideological standpoint. He has not been a person just to look what others in the region are doing and to follow them. He looks at what's in the interests of Qatar, what is actually the real issue at dispute and approaches things from that aspect.
Well, the ability to maintain relations with apparently opposing groups and countries and factions has been inherent, really, in Qatari foreign policy, particularly since the Zionist Emir has been running foreign policy. In the cases where Qatar has gone that extra step, taking sides effectively, it was on the basis of a calculation that being neutral was actually going to be worse than taking sides. In the case of Egypt, in the case of Tunisia, in the case of Libya, in the case of Syria, in the case of Yemen. It was a clear decision taken. This is the way things are going. There's absolutely no point in staying behind the curve. We've got to get ahead of the curve.
There is no doubt that one of the main drivers of the Emir's foreign policy is a humanitarian one. Gaddafi was never someone who was going to listen to reason, but by throwing his full weight behind the process of helping the uprising in Libya, he was very conscious of the humanitarian needs of the people there.
فإذا بالطفل الليبي أول قطرات حليب تصل إلى جوفه الرضيع كانت من قطر، قطر الخير، قطر الإغاثة. المرضى انقطع عليهم الدواء، مستشفيات مليئة بالمرضى، ثم زاد عدد الجرحى، كثر عدد الجرحى، فأول جرعات لمريض وصلت من قطر، وأول ضمادات للجراح لمن جرحوا في المعارك وصلت من قطر.
The call for military action was a surprise because it was the first time an Arab League country had actually taken that kind of step.
There was an absolute lack of leadership elsewhere, including in the Arab world, but also, of course, beyond that.
But it was typical of the Emir that having called for military action, he was prepared to put his money where his mouth is, as it were, and commit Qatari Air Force to playing a part as well.
It was in part a symbolic action, but it was a demonstration that here is an Arab country that can actually do more than talk and take the lead, and it proved successful.
The Emir would probably take the view that if you're going to achieve anything in foreign policy, you've got to be prepared to talk to the people you disagree with, not just the people you agree with. So when events started to go wrong in Syria, he pushed very hard for a political reconciliation process early on. When President Assad would not listen and the fighting got worse, his primary concern became the humanitarian one. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's been supportive of a military intervention there to try to bring the conflict to an end as quickly as possible.
فإنني أرى أنه من الأولى والأجدر أن تتدخل الدول العربية نفسها انطلاقا من واجبها القومي والإنساني سياسيا وعسكريا والقيام بما يفرض ويكفل وقف نزيف الدم السوري وقتل الأبرياء وتشريدهم وضمان الانتقال السلمي للسلطة في سوريا.
But Qatar has played an extraordinary role, I think, in terms of bringing parties together through very focused, concerted efforts by key people all the way to His Highness the Emir himself. They range from an attempt to bring the Palestinian factions together, between Hamas and Fatah.
إنما تضمنه الإعلان له خير دليل على التصميم لدى الأخوة في حركتي فتح وحماس على إعادة اللحمة إلى الجسم الفلسطيني السياسي.
To really rather successful brokering peace between or understanding between factions in Lebanon, to a huge investment of effort in Darfur in Sudan. The highway that was built was an indication, a demonstration of the benefits that could be had from coming to a rational, amicable settlement of this dispute.
Sometimes you hear in the West, why aren't the rich Arab states giving more aid around in humanitarian crises? Actually, they do, but they do not trumpet it.
The support by the Qatar to Japan after the great disaster in 2011 was the quickest and the largest among the world, with $100 million reconstruction assistance by the initiative of His Highness the Emir, and additional supply of more than 4 million tons of liquefied natural gas.
The Emir does stick by his friends, and that's actually a very, very strong Arab tradition as well, that people who have helped you, you stay by them for a long time. And if you could dig out the figures, you'd find that per capita, the countries like Qatar give far more in humanitarian crises than any of the Western countries do.
The uniqueness about Qatari foreign policy lies in part, of course, in the contrast between its smallness and its regional and global influence. It shows a very coherent and very focused and hugely energetic leadership that picks up these opportunities and runs with them in a very persuasive way.
One of the things about the Emir which I think sets him apart from most other rulers in the region is that he is totally committed to what is good for the country. There's never been a personal ambition in this at all. Other people may sometimes disagree with the specifics of that vision, but I don't think anybody could question the commitment he has to trying to do what is best for the country.
The winner to organize the 22 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
أكيد الشعور يعني المنافسة كانت قوية، وطبعا احنا أول مرة نحس بأجواء المنافسات في كواليس الفيفا وكيف الناس تتحرك وكيف تشرح ملفها. وطبعا أنا لابد كلمة تقدير للفريق اللي معظمهم أقل من 25 سنة اللي قادوا فايل قطر إلى فيفا واللي أثمر عن استضافة قطر للمونديال 2022.
I think the World Cup bid was an example of how the Qataris are able to mobilise their extraordinarily strong soft power. They got some extremely good names behind them. They put together a very compelling bid. And of course, unlike many other countries in the world, if they say they are going to do something, no one turns around and say, "Can you afford it?" Because they can afford it.
I'm the dreamer, but nunca creía que Qatar va a organizar campeonato del mundo. Diría yo, el día cuando se anunció que Qatar va a organizar campeonato mundial 2022, era tan feliz. He tenido emociones y, verdad, pienso que va a ser un campeonato del mundo maravilloso porque el Qatar es el país de sueños.
Y ver lo que yo vi el 2003 y hoy en el 2012 es fantástico la evolución del país. Prácticamente he venido todos los años y te das cuenta de la apuesta de Qatar por el deporte, por la cultura, por la universidad, ¿no? Por los eventos, ¿no? Yo creo que es un país muy preparado, un país que se está preparando y estoy seguro que 2022 va a ser un gran mundial, una gran apuesta de Qatar.
Creo que Qatar está preparado, ¿no? para hacer un gran mundial, para que tanto los jugadores de fútbol, los profesionales, las selecciones y tanto los aficionados disfruten de grandes partidos, de muchas comodidades, de muchas facilidades para disfrutar tanto de lo que es el fútbol y luego en lo que es conocer la historia y la cultura de Qatar, ¿no? Estoy jugando en la Liga Qatarí, tengo un contrato de 2 años y también estoy colaborando con Aspire Academy como asesor, ayudando al desarrollo de los jugadores de Qatar, con el foco en ese Mundial 2022, ¿no? Para que el nivel en el fútbol qatarí pues, se suba poco a poco y en ese mundial pues puedan competir a un nivel muy alto.
O sea, la gente debe ser consciente de dónde Qatar era antes, dónde está hoy y, verdad, es muy difícil imaginarse dónde Qatar va a estar dentro de ese año. Pienso que es importantísimo, es fundamental cuando un país como Qatar tiene líderes que tienen visión que pocos países del mundo tienen.